Boa noite. Where's the Portuguese speakers? Boa noite. Portuguese is like Spanish except better. I'm just kidding. It's not quite as like flamboyant as Italian, but it's just got a little extra zest to it. Yeah, he's definitely a believer. The president, he's like over the top, strong believer. So it's good to be here, the first weekend in the series of First Fridays. It's always a blessing to be here. Thanks again for having me, Paul. So I was, the other day when Paul was around the back of Publix, over by the dumpsters getting his flu shot, I was meditating on the word for tonight. I was meditating on the word. He was getting his flu shot from the Publix doctors. And I was thinking it was amazing because really the timing, the divine timing, just the sovereign arrangement of me being here. They had said, would you like to talk about just sort of a Middle East update, prophetic update, some of what's been unfolding, what do you see happening? And then just last minute, everything erupts in Baghdad, in Iraq, and a lot in the news that we'll talk about. But I was thinking back 5 years ago, so right now we're at January 2020, which is crazy, because what that means is that all of my Y2K food has just officially expired. The 20-year limit, it's actually time to throw it out. That's a disappointment. I'm going to polish off the powdered chocolate pudding, though. I think the thing of it is it's expired, which means it doesn't have nutritional value anymore, but that doesn't mean it's not beneficial. Like, if you're just one of those people that needs about 2 pounds in your gut to go to sleep, it'll still do the trick. You won't get any nutrients from it, but it will weigh you down into the darkness. So it's not entirely useless. But 5 years ago today, I was in northern Iraq. So the summer of 2014, ISIS blew out of Syria, swept across Syria, blew into Iraq, and we were all just watching on our phones. We were watching a social media genocide. It was crazy. They were masters of social media. We were watching families in villages, Muslims, Christians, Yazidis being slaughtered. It was a nightmare. It was like a mini Holocaust unfolding right in front of us. And as soon as that all happened, I started talking to some of my friends, and we were just saying, we have to get over there. We have to get over there as soon as possible and say, Lord, what are you doing? It's not really the natural thing when Satan is waving his flag and pulling out all the stops and posting the videos. And, Satan always overextends, by the way. He always goes too far. But it's not an easy thing when those type of things are unfolding to say, what are you doing, Lord? Because whether we realize it or not, God is always up to something, and he's always 1,000 steps ahead of Satan, right? Satan always overplays his cards. And the Lord's like, I knew you were going to do that. And he's like, well, I'll just do this. And he's like, I knew you were going to do that. He's like, and I've already planned for it. And so one of the things that I was saying is, I was praying, Lord, what are you doing? And we went over there and we ministered to some of the refugees that had fled into northern Iraq and the Kurdish areas. We brought a medical doctor. But a lot of it was just praying, saying, Lord, how can we come? How can we be? If Jesus was walking the earth right now, ISIS is unfolding, where would he be? And we said, I think he would be in northern Iraq. I think he would be there ministering. And so we were looking for the opportunities. And one of the things that came to me at that time, and I started saying, is that what Satan is doing right now is he's going to shoot himself in the foot. And what it's going to result in is a revival. And you go, wait a minute, what? Whenever Satan overplays his hand, which he did, what it did is it caused a significant part of the Islamic world to look at this and go, this is satanic. What these guys are doing is satanic. And really probably half of the people that you would talk to, they would say, that's not Islam. They would do the same thing that a lot of Westerners do. That's not Islam. Islam is peace. That's not from the Quran and this kind of, and then the other half would go, no, those guys are quoting the Quran. They're quoting Muhammad. What they're doing is actually after the pattern of Muhammad. And those that were honest were disgusted by what they saw. And I predicted back then that we are going to see a revival. Wherever Satan has tried to establish his throne, we're going to see a revival. So just recently, we were in Washington, D.C., and I had the privilege to meet Ilham Ahmed, who's essentially the president of the Syrian section of, the Kurdish section of Syria. And we got permission with some friends to go in, and what's amazing is all up there, this was where ISIS established it was initially established in Raqqa and all of those areas. Now, I won't tell you the actual city, but there's one city up there that has 3 churches entirely comprised of converts. This is unheard of, and they're open. They meet openly. It's not underground. It's not hidden. 3 churches filled with converts. And my buddy that was just there, I wasn't there, he said, everywhere I went, I kept talking to people. Like, oh, my cousin, my nephew, my brother is in, they didn't say Christian. They said an evangelical. That was their term. Because you've got a lot of the traditional Christians that, oh, he became an evangelical. And so 5 years later, Satan went crazy a few years ago. 5 years later, there is a revival in northern Syria, in the Kurdish areas, and Muslims are coming to faith. So there's a lot, whenever you watch the news, you don't see that. You only see what Satan's doing. But it's wonderful to testify about a lot of the things that the Lord is doing. So we're going to do a Middle East update. That's the title of the message tonight. First slide. How many don't know who this guy is? Qasem Soleimani. He was essentially a general from Iran. And I don't want to make a joke. We just killed him. He was, I'll get into it more. Too many bad jokes. I just got to refrain. The Iraqi parliament is about to vote on whether or not we should, whether or not they are going to kick all U.S. troops out of Iraq. And what I was thinking we should do is just put a few drones over the parliament and just let them hover. No, just kidding. Choose wisely. Either that or just a giant blimp that is half military drone, half Trump casino, just floating up there over the parliament, just as a little bit of a warning. But yeah, this was a big deal. A lot of people were saying the death of General Soleimani is far bigger than the death of Baghdadi or bin Laden or anything. Of course, he's coming from the Shia side of things. He's not a Sunni like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda. He's from Iran. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at tonight, and by the way, let me say this too, and this is interesting. There's a few interesting things that are popping up tonight. Is when I was in Iraq 5 years ago, I sat down in a friend's upper room. He has a prayer room up there. And I said, I'm going to do an exposition of Daniel chapter 8. First time I'd ever sat down and recorded an exposition of Daniel chapter 8, which is much of what we're going to talk about tonight. And I laid it out and I said, here's sort of an alternative interpretation of this chapter. And I said, if this alternative interpretation is correct, then here's what we should expect to see over the next few years. And I said, I'm not someone up here that's saying, I'm a prophet and watch this and behold. I'm saying, let's as watchmen sit back and let's watch and see if these things begin to unfold. And if they do, then maybe we pull the trigger, so to speak, or hit the button and say, this is that. We need to be so careful of saying, this is that. We do it so often. This is that, this is that. No, it's not quite that yet. But as watchmen, what I'll say is, having watched the Middle East over the past few years, what has unfolded throughout the region is exactly, and you can watch the video, I'm sure it's online on YouTube somewhere, Joel Richardson, Daniel 8. It's about 45 minutes, and I'm going to essentially redo some of that tonight. So Daniel chapter 8, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar the king, a vision appeared to me, Daniel. So this is a different vision. After Daniel 7, you had the vision of the 4 beasts. This is a different vision. It happened after that. And I've thrown up a map because we're Americans and we don't know the world around us. When we were at war in Iraq, 85% of Americans didn't even know where Iraq was on a map. So here's the Middle East, and what I've done to make it simple is I put a blue Star of David on the state of Israel. That is the place that Yeshua is coming back to reestablish the throne of his father David, where he will rule the world from. Okay, so look at the star, just think, throne of David. Over there in Iran, I've got a green star. That is where Daniel was when this vision was given to him. He was in the province of Elam, that's the southwestern province of Persia, modern-day Iran, in the city of Shushan, or Susa. Today it's called Shush. It's basically the same name. So this is sort of just the context. You get a feel of where we are and what we're looking at. And then Daniel says this, verses 3 through 4. He says, "Behold, a ram, which had 2 horns." So that's a goat, except he's got 2 horns. "And I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward, and no other beast could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased, and he magnified himself." Right? So, go to the next map. What is Daniel seeing? He sees a ram coming from the region of Persia or Iran, butting out to the north, to the east, and toward the beautiful land, toward Israel. It's pretty simple, right? The goat represents, as we'll see, it represents Persia. It's not a real goat. Then in verse 5 through 6, while I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a prominent or conspicuous horn between his eyes. He's a unicorn goat. He came up to the ram and he rushed at him with mighty wrath. This just so reminds me, if you love boxing or MMA or whatever, you know, some guy comes along, the ram, and you're like, man, nobody can beat that guy. Until someone comes along and beats him. And then they're like, no one can beat that guy. You know, everybody turns 40 eventually, right? It starts out where it's like the ram. No one can beat him. He does as he pleases. And then this goat comes along and he rushes at him with mighty wrath. Verse 7, I saw him come beside the ram and he was enraged. The goat was enraged at the ram and he struck the ram and he shattered his 2 horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. So he hurled him to the ground and he trampled on him, and there was none to rescue the ram from his power, right? So now the new undisputed regional Middle Eastern champion, the Mideast Beast. That was my second book, The Mideast Beast. I didn't choose the name, by the way. My publisher did, but now my friends all call me the Mideast Beast. Verse 15 through 16, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. Understandably so. He goes, I want to know the interpretation. And behold, I love this. Behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man. Someone who looked like a man. We're not talking some transgender. This is a whole different situation. This individual, this being looked like a man, but it was not actually a man. Sorry. I ruined it. I ruined the anointing. Here's the good part. And he called out to me and he said, Gabriel. I love that. Gabriel is in the house. Give this man understanding of the vision. So Gabriel, that comes to Mary, the messenger, angel Gabriel. And he hears, give him understanding. Give him the interpretation of the vision. Now, what virtually every commentary that you look at is going to say this vision is about the Medes and the Persians back in history as they budded out from the region of Persia and Media. And they invaded the whole Middle East. And then later came from the west this goat with a prominent horn. They go, that was Alexander the Great. I think I've got a picture up there of Alexander, a mosaic of Alexander the Great. And every commentary, every conservative evangelical commentary that believes the Bible will say that this is talking about history. And the prominent horn was Alexander the Great. I've got close to 200 commentaries on the book of Daniel. And, you know, across the boards, that's going to be the interpretation. I'm going to offer a slightly different interpretation. Daniel 8, verse 20 through 21. This is the angelic, divine, from the throne of God interpretation. He says, the ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of, all English translations will say, Greece. We're going to correct that in a minute. And then he said, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king of Greece. Here's the problem. Alexander the Great was like the 32nd king of Macedonia. He wasn't the first king. Wasn't the first king of Greece. That's a historical problem. There's other problems, and actually this is pretty clear. Daniel, verse 17. Gabriel came near to me where I was standing, and when he came, I was frightened, and I fell on my face, and he said to me, now, hear the words of Gabriel the angel. Son of man, he's talking to Daniel, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. Right? Now, what people will say is they'll say, well, the prophecy begins in history, but it gradually bleeds into the end. And so the last few verses of the vision are about the end times, but it starts in history. And that's a valid possibility. That's not what Gabriel said. He said the vision pertains to the time of the end. Daniel falls down, he passes out. Gabriel picks him up. And then he says, behold, verse 19, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of indignation, third time, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. 2 sentences, 3 times, Gabriel says, Daniel, the vision is about the end times. If we take the word of God seriously, if we take the words of Gabriel seriously in the Word of God, then we have to really wrestle through whether or not this entire vision is not about the Medes and the Persians and Alexander the Great, but about our day now. It's a very valid alternative interpretation. And again, I want to suggest caution. We have to approach these things cautiously. But if indeed that is the interpretation, I want to go back to verse 20 and 21. The ram which you saw with the 2 horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. Well, everyone goes, there you go. It's history, the kings of Media and Persia, because it uses historical names. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. Well, in the Hebrew, the word there is Yavan. It's not Greece, it's Yavan. Well, Yavan later became used for Greece. Words evolve and change throughout history, words evolve even throughout the Bible, just like they do in any language. Eventually it came to be referred to Greece, but it initially had a very different meaning. And then the large horn, again, is the first king. So here's a map, and from a biblical perspective, the word Yavan referred to, I actually should have pulled the whole thing over. It refers, yes, to the Greek Isles. So when we think Greece, we think Zorba the Greek, right? We think Greek yogurt. We think the Greek islands. In biblical history, Yavan was the kingdom of Macedonia. Yes, it was the Greek islands and the coast of Greece, but it was also Western Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. That's the region that the vision is pointing to. Now, here's the thing. When we look at a prophecy, let's say Ezekiel 38 and 39, it doesn't say Iran, Russia, Turkey. It says Meshech, Tubal, Gomer to Gorma, right? It uses ancient names, but we look at the context of the prophecy and we go, this is obviously an end-time prophecy. So we say what Ezekiel was doing was using the names of his day to help us locate the regions that he's pointing to that would invade Israel in the last days, right? That's how we interpret prophecy when they use ancient names, which they usually do because they didn't know the name Turkey or Russia or Iran. They say Persia, Meshach, etc., right? Lud is another name for Turkey. Likewise, here in Daniel 8, I would suggest that when it says the kings represent Media and Persia, it's talking about the regions of modern-day Iran. When it says Yavan, it's talking about the regions of probably Turkey. Maybe you could include Greece, but that's the region that it's pointing to. Okay, so how would Daniel's hearers, his immediate audience, have understood these things? Because Greece didn't exist yet. In the 5th century BC, when this vision was given to Daniel, there was no Greece. There was Yavan. And that's how they would have understood it. Okay? So if that's the case, go to the next map, then essentially what the vision is saying is this. We're going to see a ram with 2 horns, and he's going to bud out from the region of Persia. And then and it says, and he's going to become exceedingly great, and no one is going to be able to stop his power. He's going to do as he pleases. And then eventually, a single horn goat from the region of Yavan, from the region of Turkey, he gets furious, and he strikes back and takes out the 2-horned ram. Now, the rest of the vision, basically what it says, then, when the goat with the prominent horn is at the height of his power, the prominent horn is broken off, which represents the king, essentially, of, we'll say, Turkey, and he dies. And again, remember, it's the first king of Yavan. So now you go, well, wait a minute, Joel, but if you're saying that this is in modern times, then how would that apply? I asked that question to myself back in 2015. I go, yeah, it doesn't really fit. Turkey, the Republic of Turkey's had many presidents. It doesn't have a... And then all of a sudden something happened a few years ago, again in June. It was the failed coup of the summer of 2016 or 17? And essentially President Erdogan of Turkey, I won't get into all the details, but it was a false flag. It was the false flag of false flags, where he claimed that there was this coup effort, and he wiped it out. It was a very staged event, and he has used it since then to completely take over the country and to establish himself as the closest thing to a king that Turkey has ever seen in its history, in its past 90 years as the Turkish Republic, the Republic of Turkey. He used this crisis to, basically, he has now taken over every single media outlet in the country. He's arrested and jailed thousands, tens of thousands of Turks that are opposed to him, judges, professors, teachers, police. He's taken over the judiciary. He's taken over the parliament. He's taken over the military. He's taken over the media. Yes, it's a democracy, right? And I go, he kind of could be essentially the first king of Turkey. Like, it fits all of a sudden. I go, that's, he's greater than Ataturk. If you know the history of Turkey, he's the founder of the modern Republic of Turkey. He set himself up as greater than Ataturk. And I hate to say it, but our president has been bowing to Erdogan. Sorry to upset you. So this is the clash that we're talking about. It lays it out, but then it says that prominent leader would die, and then it says this new greater Yavan gets broken up into 4, and then it says out of one of those 4 comes the little horn. That's the Antichrist. That's the individual that Christians call the Antichrist. He has many names throughout the scriptures. That's Gog, essentially. Ezekiel calls him Gog. Many different names, but this is that's crazy. You Christians are crazy. What's this Antichrist stuff? Yeah, it's a dictator. Like, that's never happened before. A powerful dictator will arise from the Middle East. Well, that dictators never rise in the Middle East. So 5 years ago, I sat there again on film and I said, essentially what the vision is saying is the next major step. Now look, if this vision is end times, if Gabriel's words are to be taken at face value, then these are the 4 steps. This is the clearest step-by-step roadmap to the return of the Messiah in all of Scripture. Iran butts out to the Middle East. Turkey responds and defeats Iran. The prominent leader of Yavan dies. It breaks up into 4. Out of one of those comes the Antichrist. And guys, that could happen. It could happen fairly rapidly. I mean, that could unfold over 100 years, or it could unfold over 4, 5, 6 years. It could happen quickly. It really could. But let me just say this with regard to Iran. Okay, first of all, Iran plays the long game. Iran is very patient, very calculating. And they don't do anything overtly, hardly ever. They use proxies. They use puppets. They use in Lebanon, Hezbollah, right? They use in Syria, Bashar Assad. That's an Iranian puppet, a client of Iran. Hezbollah is essentially the Iranian tentacles strangling Lebanon. Okay, now just since 2015 when we were there, again working primarily in the Kurdish areas, this new group moved in. There's a picture here of a couple guys. And their name, they called in Arabic, Hasht al-Shabi. In English, you'll hear the Popular Mobilization Units. Now they just call them Hezbollah of Iraq. Here they are standing outside the American Embassy. And what's spray painted there on the American Embassy, this is just 3 days ago. This is when Paul was getting his vaccines by the dumpsters out behind Publix. And you can look at the timestamp, and it lines up. What the spray paint says in Arabic is it says, Qasem Suleiman is my leader. These guys, general, that have taken over Iraq, were led by an Iranian general. Iran, yes, they haven't butted out like with tanks rolling into Iraq. They have extended their spidery tentacles just like they did patiently and in a calculating way over Lebanon, just like they are using the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Now they have taken over Iraq, just like they've used Bashar Assad. They have slipped in, and they have, in many ways, butted out and conquered Iraq for all intents and purposes. They've largely conquered Iraq. A couple more pictures. Here is a group of Hasht al-Shabi marching. Look, this was a militia that is now more powerful than the Iraqi military. And you know, as you talk to the locals there in Iraq, they go, the president of Iraq, it's Qasem Suleiman. So you have to understand who we just killed and what this was about. But we also have to understand that the prophecy of Daniel 8 in many ways, it's not overt like we would expect with a war, like they just come barreling in again with troops, but they're there. They have invaded Iraq. And that was not that way just a few years ago. And I sat there on a video and I said, I want to be careful. I don't want to push the button and say this is that. I said, but if Iran invades Iraq, then I'll really start taking this a lot more seriously. And a few years later, I'm going, guys, we need to take this seriously. This very well may be the unfolding. Now, the next step would be a Turkish invasion of the Middle East, right? This clashing. And throughout history, those two parts of the world are always clashing. Well, what has Turkey been up to the past few months? Besides invading Syria, this is the area that I just met with the president of, the Kurdish areas of Syria. It is a foreign invasion of another country against their permission. That's war. And so these two alpha dogs are battling for the heart of the Middle East. And who gets caught in the middle? It's always Israel. Israel always gets caught in the middle. So just to summarize Daniel 8, you have the clash between the two-horned ram and the goat, followed by the prominent leader of Turkey or Yavan dying, out of which this whole new regional development breaks up into 4. We can speculate about those 4. The scriptures don't tell us. And then out of one of those comes the Antichrist. It's really clear. Okay, now, I want to go back to what I was saying at the beginning. Christians are funny, the way we talk about prophecy. You know, Jesus gives us the analogy. He says the return of Jesus, it's like this. And he talks about birth pains. And he says, you know, first, before the birth, are the birth pains. And so we look at that and we go, we're excited about the birth, but then we have these conferences, and all we do is sit around and talk about the birth pains. Hey, what are you guys doing this weekend? I don't know. I was thinking we could get together and just talk all weekend about the birth pains. Right? Prophecy conference. And we talk about what Satan's doing, and we hardly ever talk about the birth. Hey, you know, it's a big party. It's a big circus of missing the point. Yes, he wants us to discuss these things. He wants us to understand them. He wants us to be aware of them. He wants us to be watchmen. But he doesn't want us focusing on them endlessly. He wants us focusing on what he's doing and what he's going to do, right? So I want to make sure that I don't just say, it's bad, it's getting bad, prophecy's being fulfilled, the Antichrist is coming. Thank you all, it's been good, I'll see you. I want to make sure that we talk about what God's doing. So I want to give a little bit of a recap and come back to what I was talking about last year. How many people were not here last year? Everybody else was here? Raise your hand if you were here. I was talking about Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia. Go to the first slide. I keep going. I just took the first Christian tour in history to Saudi Arabia in October. That right there is from Fox News. I can't tell you, like, just the crazy things that have been unfolding the past year, even since I was here. I knew this was coming. We've been working on it and planning on it, but tourism was not open into Saudi Arabia, and a week before we found a way to get in through all sorts of channels, and we were taking in the first Christian tour, and a week before we went in, Saudi Arabia, for the first time in history, opened up the country to tourism, outside tourism. And so I was bringing in about 20, 25 Christians, and I said, well, look, if they're officially going to welcome in the world now, because they know they're running out of oil and they need to diversify their economy, the first thing that everyone says, you go into Saudi Arabia, you don't bring in Bibles, don't bring in crosses, definitely hide all of your Hebrew tattoos, etc., Star of David, like cover that up especially. And yet I looked at the website and I said, I don't see anything that says no Bibles. I don't see anything that says no this or no that. If they're welcoming us in, then I'm going in with my flags flying high, right? And so we went in. Last year I showed you a whole bunch of pictures of what I believe to be the real Mount Sinai. In fact, it is the real Mount Sinai. It is the most unbelievable place that in the earth. Like it's bizarre. It's crazy. It's the real deal. Like, and we went, and I brought my Bible. Not this one. I have a new one. This is my new Bible. I'm so excited. It's like I have a new girlfriend. So she smells like a goat. I spent big money for that goat skin. So I'll tell you why at the end, why I have a new Bible. But so I brought in my Bible, and guys, we went to the mountain. This was so powerful. We went to the mountain, at the base of the mountain, right beside the altar that's still there to this day. That the scriptures say Moses built an altar at the base of the mountain. Right next to the altar are 12 pillars, according to the scriptures. And we all gathered together, and I got out my Bible, and I said to my Saudi tour guides, I said, can I read a few scriptures? Oh, of course, yes, please. I'll read from the Quran. You know, it's all good. Kumbaya, Allah. And I was like, cool. You do whatever you do. I'm reading the Bible. And all the Saudi the drivers and the tour guides are sitting around the corner with their cell phones, filming the whole thing. They'd never seen anything like that. And I'll tell you what happened in a minute. And we gathered together and we held hands in a big circle, and we sang a song. Behold, he comes. Right, and you know why we chose that? Out of Zion's hill Zion, Zion, Zion. It's a great song. And also, when you get 25 people that aren't worship leaders, it's hard to find a good hymn that everybody knows. Everyone knows that one. We sang that, we read from the scriptures, and we held hands, and we said, Father, I just prayed out loud. I said, Father, I thank you so much that the kingdom of Saudi Arabia has welcomed us officially as a Christian tour into the country. And now we're standing here in front of your mountain, and we say, Lord, we welcome you into Saudi Arabia. This is your mountain, Lord. Welcome home. And it was, honestly, it was like, I'm not a super spooky, I felt like, this sounds so charismatic, I felt like I just gave birth. Like, in terms of what I'd been carrying in the spirit for the past year and a half, I just was weeping. Like, it was just, Lord, would you let your face shine on the kingdom of Saudi Arabia? And because, look, again, Satan's up to a lot of things, but the Lord is up to some amazing things as well. Now, go to the first slide. Go to the next slide. This is, looking at Mount Sinai, this is about the top third. Down below, we're standing down here next to the altar of Moses and the pillars, and by the way, the golden calf altar's over here. And you look up and see the cave near the top. That would be the cave that Elijah would have sat in, right? So you look up and you can see the cave. Well, what you can't see when you're sitting here is that the actual peak of the mountain is way up and past that. So the goal after the tour, some guys stayed behind, we were going to hike up to the top. We want to hike to the top of Mount Sinai. And by the way, the prescription against stepping foot on the mountain, that was only for that particular time. The goats are all over the mountain. You know, there's donkeys. Like, if they can do it, a donkey like me is not going to defile it. Although I was a little apprehensive of going to the bathroom. That's beside the point. But so we went up over this ridge. I'm going to show you a picture of over the ridge. I had never been up there before. I had been to the mountain. I'd seen a lot of the sights. I was blown away. When I got up over the ridge, go to the next slide. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to read some scriptures. Shemot, Exodus 24. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders of Israel. You are to worship the Lord at a distance. So come up to the mountain, but worship the Lord from a distance. But Moses alone is to approach the Lord. The others must not come. So the idea is that they go halfway up the mountain, but not all the way up. Only Moses, well, actually, it seems like Joshua went a good ways up as well. But verses 9 through 11, this is one of the most amazing, ridiculously amazing portions of Scripture. Now, Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. So they're halfway up on the mountain. They saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something, it's like they can't even explain it, something like pavement of lapis lazuli, as bright blue as the sky. But God and then this is the miracle, but God didn't raise his hand against the leaders. He didn't kill them, in other words. They saw God, and they ate and drank. So the covenant at Mount Sinai was a marriage covenant. This is the wedding feast. This was the sealing the deal. The elders, as the representatives of Israel, Moses and the 70 elders, they went halfway up and they ate, and they looked up and they saw God. When you get up over that ridge, up past Elijah's cave, go to the next slide. Oh, first, there it is. Now go to the next slide. That's what you find when you get up there. There's a plateau over the ridge the size of a football field. And then is the peak of Mount Sinai. And you get there and you read the scriptures and you go, duh, this is obviously where they ate and drank, and they were up there for a while. This is where the marriage supper, the covenant sealing feast took place, right here at the plateau. When you're up there, you feel like you're down on the ground because you're surrounded by these kind of ridges, and there's just this plateau. It's amazing. Go to the next slide. Oh, there's the crew. Go to the next slide. Now you're up closer to the mountain. You can see the top is basalt, and that takes a couple hours just to get up there. Like, that's a beast. It's a beast of a mountain. That's another, I don't know, it's another like couple thousand feet. And so we proceeded from there. But here's the thing, guys. I couldn't have planned this. I didn't plan this. We camped up there on the plateau that night, the last night of Sukkot. Go to the next slide. My buddy took that picture. The Milky Way was glowing throughout the sky over Mount Sinai. That's what I fell asleep to. I mean, it was like, it doesn't get closer to an out-of-body experience. I mean, it was just incredible. I just had to share that because I'm still glowing, and I could talk all night just about that. I want to talk about something else that I believe the Lord is doing, because the Lord has opened up the country, and he's opened up this opportunity to bring people to this mountain, which most of the scholarly world goes, that's not Mount Sinai, that's crazy talk, and then you go there, and everybody that came on the tour, like, there's a few people that came, they're like, I don't think this is the real Mount Sinai, and then they went there and they're like, this is the real deal. I'm like, yeah, I told you. They're like, no, but it's really, really it. Like, obviously. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, this is incredible. I'm like, I told you. But it's more than just access to the mountain. It's more than just the testimony that God has with this. I want to look at one of my favorite. Actually, let me hit something first, because Paul mentioned sheep nations. Saudi Arabia, I don't think is going to become a sheep nation, not like, Brazil. I don't know. Let's believe for big things. I don't know that they're going to move their embassy to Jerusalem anytime soon, but I will say this. The scriptures say something that's really interesting. Ezekiel 38. What's Ezekiel 38? Gog Umagog, or Gog and Magog. It's this final invasion of Israel by Satan's little puppet and his hordes. And it lists all these nations that are going to invade Israel just before redemption. And in chapter 38, verse 13, it says this: Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all its leaders will say, they protest. They say to Gog, have you come to take spoil and plunder? Have you come to invade the land that has been reestablished? Have you come to take spoil? And there's a protest that rises up. The merchants of Tarshish is probably referring to, scholars will say it's either like Cyprus or Spain, or maybe Western Europe, or just the West in general. There's kind of a range of interpretations in terms of what it really means. But Sheba and Dedan is Saudi Arabia. Ezekiel tells us that when the final invasion of Israel happens, Saudi Arabia is not part of it. Saudi Arabia is protesting. You want to talk about crazy times? The Lord, I don't know, again, that they're going to move their embassy to Israel, but there is amazing things happening behind the scenes, largely because of the threat of Iran, mutual threats, some of it economic, and a lot of it is just the sovereign hand of God. The Lord is doing something in Saudi Arabia. And the Lord says they're not going to be part of the final invasion, the armies, the hordes of the Antichrist. Quite to the contrary. It's like kind of being a bit of a prophetic detective. One of my favorite passages in the whole script, in all of the Bible. We're going to look at this and wrap it up. Isaiah 60. This is one of the most beautiful chapters that speaks of the age of the Messiah, the age of redemption. The Messiah is on the throne in Jerusalem. The whole earth is being renewed. And it begins, verse 1, arise, shine, for your light has come. This is always the language of the coming of the Messiah. It's like the rising of the sun, which goes back, by the way, to the blessing of Moses, Deuteronomy 33. God came from Sinai. He shone forth from Mount Paran, like the rising of the sun, like the rays of the dawn. He shines forth from Mount Sinai up toward Jerusalem. That's just the language. When God comes, when the Messiah comes, It's like the dawn. It's like the rise, the brilliance, the radiance of God. And it uses this language here, arise and shine, for your light has come. Now, in order to understand this passage as Christians, you have to step outside of your Christian mindset and put yourself into the boots of a Jew that has been raised in synagogue. They've been raised with the understanding that they are the single most persecuted, consistently hated, down through history, persecuted people. And you've got this book that tells you that redemption is coming, that the Messiah is coming, that he will renew all things. And yet, despite the promises, despite all of these things, generation after generation passes, more persecution happens. You look at what's happening in Europe, you look at what's happening in New York, it's happening again. How long until redemption will come? And Isaiah, in the midst of all of this, Isaiah lifts up his voice, and you can just hear this, arise and shine, for your light has finally come. It's no longer meditations of your heart. The reality is here. Like when the sun rises, you can feel it on your skin. It has come. The glory of the Lord has risen upon you. For behold, darkness will cover the earth. That's talking about now. It's getting pretty dark, isn't it? Deep darkness will cover the peoples, but the Lord will rise upon you. Redemption will come. He will come, and his glory will appear on you. Verses 3 through 4. The Gentiles, nations will come to your light. Hold on, Isaiah. Have you been watching CNN? The nations are not exactly in love with Israel. Yeah, they get a lot of tourism, but this is describing something different. Kings are coming to the brightness of your rising. Lift up your eyes round about and see. With your eyeballs, glorified, resurrected bodies, physical eyeballs in their sockets. Look and behold. They gather together, they come to you. Your sons will come from afar. Your daughters will be carried back to Israel, dandled in their arms. Verse 5, then, I love this. How many people here, let's be honest, wrestle occasionally with sadness and depression? Sometimes it's hard when it comes over you. It's hard to shake, right? I love this verse. You will see and be radiant. Radiant. Your heart will thrill and rejoice. Like, in the same way that sometimes, just this world gets us down, right? Like, it's just the nature of things. But in the same way that that sadness can grip you, joy and rejoicing will seize our hearts. You will be radiant. Your heart will thrill and rejoice. Why? Because the abundance of the sea will be turned to you. The wealth of the Gentiles are being brought to Jerusalem. The surrounding nations, they're bringing tribute. They're not bringing armies, they're bringing wealth to build the house of God in Jerusalem. They're bringing gifts. Verse 6, now here's where it gets weird. A multitude of camels will cover your land. Whoa, what are we talking about? Camels? The young camels of Midian and Ephah and all those from Sheba will come. This is Saudi Arabia. It's not 4 or 5 camels. It's not 100 camels. It's a multitude of camels are coming up from Saudi Arabia into the kingdom of the Messiah, the kingdom of Israel, to bring tribute to Jerusalem. They're bringing gold and frankincense, Gucci. They will bear good news of the praises of the Lord. Whoa. Saudi Arabia, I know who needs Gucci. I just threw that in. It's like Tourette's. I can't stop it. Verse 7, all the flocks of Kedar, these are the children of Ishmael, will be gathered together to you. The rams of Nebaioth will minister to you. They will go up with acceptance on my altar. And I shall glorify my glorious house. The temple will be rebuilt in the age of the Messiah. And then it culminates, I'm skipping forward, verse 13 and 14. The glory of Lebanon will come to you. Hold on, Isaiah. Hezbollah? When I think Lebanon, look, the Lord's going to deal with Hezbollah. but not everyone in Lebanon is Hezbollah. It's now you have people coming from Lebanon. They're bringing gifts. They bring the juniper, the box tree, the cypress to beautify the place of my sanctuary, and I will make the place of my feet. He's present. Touchdown! His feet will be on the ground. I will make the place of my feet glorious. The sons of ISIS, the sons of Al-Qaeda, the sons of Hezbollah, the sons of Iran, those who despised you will come bowing down to you. And all those who despised you will bow themselves at the soles of your feet, and they will call you the city of the Lord, Zion. Zion. The word that is like a curse word throughout the Middle East right now will be sweet on their lips. Zion of the Holy One of Israel. This is beautiful. You have a multitude. This is evidence and proof that there is going to be a revival in Saudi Arabia. And I want to stand here right now and declare that maybe in 5 years, I'll have the chance to come back and I'll have all kinds of testimonies of salvations, of people coming to the Lord in Saudi Arabia. Because this doesn't all just happen after the Messiah returns. In order for there to be a mighty multitude coming up from that area, it has to start now. Amen? So in the midst of all the darkness will cover the earth, deep darkness the peoples. The Lord is going to rise on us. Don't get distracted. Don't get distracted by the darkness. Don't get distracted by what Satan's doing. Focus on what the Lord's doing.